right. Welcome to Grant and Fiscal Management for DRL programs, hosted by Cadre, the resource network for the Discovery Research Pre-K-12 program. We're pleased to have awardees from across DRL funding programs today. My name is Amy Busey and want to welcome all of you on behalf of Cadre. The recording and slides from today's session will be available on our website, through our sister resource networks, and emailed to all registrants. If you're having any trouble hearing me or our presenters, just let us know in the chat, or you can email cadre@edc.org. We'll be taking questions throughout the session in the Q&A window. If you'd like to pose a question anonymously, just be sure to check the anonymous option before submitting. We'll gather these so we can address them during the Q&A segment of the session. We also welcome conversation among participants in the chat. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, you can find both the chat and the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom window. We ask that you consider ways of framing your questions so that the response may be helpful to many of us rather than your specific project. If you do have project-specific questions, we encourage you to reach out to your program officer directly. We're pleased to have Cartia Brown-Morgan, Rashawn Ferrier, Julie Johnson, and Rob Oxendorf with us from NSF, who will lead today's session. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to them so we can get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cartia Brown-Morgan with the Division of Grants and Agreements. I am the Grant Management Specialist for the Division of Research and Learning. I have with me also today Mr. Rashawn Ferrier, who is the team lead for the Division of Research and Learning. In DGA, we are involved from pre-award to closeout. I have award authority to issue awards on behalf of the foundation. I'm also responsible for issuing award amendments and certain post-award prior approvals. My team lead is now going to introduce himself. Rashawn?
Rashawn, I think you're muted.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Rashawn Ferrier. I am the EHR Director of Education and Human Resources team lead, which houses DRL. Basically what I do, I am one of the last people who actually sees the proposal before it actually goes out to the grantees. So if you look at your award notices, you'll see Cartia's name, and then you'll see my name as the last person to actually review your pending proposals. So it is a pleasure to be with you today.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about the following topics. During the presentation, you will hear from both Rashawn and I, and feel free to use the chat box, like she said earlier, and ask your questions. We have allotted time at the end of the presentation where we're going to get to as many questions as we can today. Let's go ahead and get started. The award administration roles. The award belongs to the institution. An important thing to remember as the PI is if you have any technical or scientific questions, please contact your NSF program officer. If you ever have any questions concerning administrative or budgetary issues, please contact your institution's sponsored research office, or known as the SRO. The award notification. It is important that you read your award notice. In your award notice, you will find your program officer's information, your cognizant grant specialist information, your funding information. The award notice and any action submitted through FastLane or research.gov can be found on FastLane or research.gov. Participant support, Rashawn is going to cover.
Thank you, Cartia. So I am trying to see my screen. I got it. Okay, so what is participant support? So participant support is a very unique, special subject matter, especially to NSF. So what is participant support? It is a direct cost such as stipends, subsistence, travel, and allowance. So anything that you see on, when you're looking at a budget, you look at the line F on your budget pages. So that's your scholarships, your stipends, travel assistance, and then you have the F4 other. Now, when you're thinking about participant support, you also have to think about things like, well, what is a participant? I can't define that for you, but you as the institution must identify what makes a person a participant. We all know that it can't be an employee of the institution. However, if you are hosting, say, a conference, and the conference is, you're bringing in, say, professors or teachers or what have you from another institution, those individuals can now also be deemed as participants. Also, when you're thinking about participant support, you should also think about having separate account codes, sub-ledger accounts, things of that nature. And when I say that, you want to be able to separate those costs from the rest of your line items, because those costs are very unique, and we want to make sure that NSF will be able to see those costs if we ever come out and do a site visit. Okay, next slide.
No cost extensions. Okay, let's say you require additional time beyond your established award end date. You could request a grantee approved no cost extension. However, you cannot request an extension if you have a zero balance. All requests should be submitted to NSF at least 45 days prior to the award end date. The first NSF approved no cost extension is acknowledged by the NSF program officer. Something important to remember, for grantee approved extensions and the first NSF approved no cost extension, no amendment will be issued. The second NSF approved no cost extension is reviewed by the program officer and approved, and then by the cognizant grants officer. You will then receive an official amendment.
So indirect costs, what are indirect costs? Those are those costs that the university absorb for actually hosting and supporting the grant. When you're using your indirect costs, the one thing I want you to make sure is that you can't use a different rate that hasn't been federally negotiated. We see a lot of times grantees will try to say, well, our indirect cost rate is so high, so we're going to use a lower rate that's not even on our rate agreement. You can't do that. The reason why, that is voluntary cost sharing, which is prohibited by NSF policy. So remember, when you're even doing a supplement, if you get an award and now you say, hey, I need supplemental funding, you must use the IDC rate at the time of award. Now, when I say that, saying if you have 5 different rates on one rate agreement, say you have 50%, 26%, 23%, and your original award was awarded at 50%. If you did a supplement, you could charge that 26% because it was on the original rate agreement. You wouldn't have to necessarily stick to that 50%, but as long as that rate was a part of that original rate agreement at the time of the original award, you could do it. So just make sure you're aware of that. We're always here to help you. If you have any questions, especially when you're dealing with indirect costs, feel free to contact the Division of Grants and Agreements. So common notifications and requests. So one thing I want to make sure when you're dealing with adding co-PIs, NSF only allows you to add 4 per award. So if you have 5, that other person cannot get that recognition as a co-PI. So make sure that you are aware that NSF only allows up to 4. Also, when you're dealing with a, say, PI transfer, a PI transfer is when PI says, I want to take my, I'm using hyphens, taking the award and moving it to another institution. First, like Cartia said earlier, the award belongs to the institution. So the institution would have to relinquish the rights and the privileges of the award, if the institution says, hey, we want to keep this award, you do not have any authority to fight that because the award goes to the institution. So make sure you're aware of that. Also, if there is any remaining funds, we will not referee those issues that is between the old institution that's relinquished the award and the new institution. Once those two parties have agreed upon that final number, that will be the number that will be actually transferred to the new institution. Next slide.
Okay.
So,
One source of confusion seems to be about the relationship between the prime awardee, the subawardee, and NSF. Specifically, the prime awardee bears legal responsibility and oversight responsibility, and the subawardee does not have a legal relationship with NSF. Thus, all questions about this subaward should be directed to the prime awardee's institution versus us at NSF. I can't stress that enough. I'm gonna say it again. Questions about this subaward should be directed to the prime awardee's institution versus us at NSF.
So subawards, and Rob is going to jump in quickly on subawards after I do my little spiel. I'll let Rob jump in. So what is a subaward? A subaward is an opportunity where an entity, an organization wants to take a level of effort of the award to carry out the purpose of the award. When you're dealing with a subaward, you must be fully aware of what you're getting into. And by that, what I'm saying is you have to make sure as the prime awardee that you know who you're getting into business with. Have you done a risk assessment? Have you determined that the person or the organization that you want to do business with, are they good stewards of federal funds? Can they actually manage the request that you have to actually carry out this level of effort? Also, when you're dealing with a subaward, a separate budget and justification must be submitted. You can't submit a subaward without letting us know exactly how much money you're requesting as a subawardee. Also, what is the justification? Also, if you do not, also in that, make sure that the subawardee uses their indirect cost rate. If they do not have an indirect cost rate, they can use what we call a de minimis rate, which is 10% of the modified total direct cost. And with that, I'll let Rob jump in.
Great, thanks. Just a question for Rashawn. We sometimes get PIs will ask, I didn't have a subaward on the original grant, but I would like to add a subaward.
Okay.
And the opposite, what about if we had a subaward, but we wish to terminate the subaward? Which of those scenarios requires NSF approval? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, sure, thank you, Rob. So if you wanted to add a subaward after the award is made, you will go into research.gov and you will do an addition of a subaward. In that request, you would attach your original budget, so the cumulative amount, and then in that amount, you would also take into account that subaward budget, because you still need to take that indirect cost because you're tacking on a subaward. Now, also, like I said earlier, you also include the subaward budget and the budget justification. And then Rob asked, well, what if you have a subaward and they're not doing well? So what you can do is remove the award. The subawardee. You do not need NSF prior approval. I will always say that it is very nice to let your program officer know that you're terminating a subawardee, because they need to know what is going on, because you two entities have came into an agreement that you were going to carry out a level of effort. And if that subaward didn't meet those milestones, maybe there's something that you and the program officers need to talk about as far as effective strategies, or something maybe in the the design. There's so many different variables when it comes to why a subawardee may not be able to perform. But you should give your program officer a call or send them an email to let them know prior to terminating that something is going wrong so they can assist you. Sometimes subaward doesn't work out. Sometimes there's issues with personalities. There's sometimes issues with the actual output of work. So it comes in a whole gamut of reasons of why a subaward would not work. Also, do not be ashamed if it doesn't work. Sometimes things do not work. I think grantees get into a utopian sense of reality where they think, I got this award, so now NSF thinks that everything I have to do is perfect. There's no grant that we've ever awarded that's perfect. So we're anticipating bumps in the road. We are anticipating roadblocks. We are anticipating things to go wrong. The issue becomes when you don't let NSF know. If it's, I don't care how big, I don't care how small, please talk to your program officers. Please talk to us in the Division of Grants and Agreements if there's a budgetary issue. We don't care how small, how big. There's no such thing as a stupid question. So ask away. Thanks, Rob. I think I'm ready for the next slide. So monitoring. So how does NSF monitor your activities? We do it a lot of different ways, especially in this new world, that new normal that we're living in. A lot of things that we were doing where we used to actually come out to your institutions, we're now doing virtually. So we have first programmatic site visits. So what are programmatic site visits? That's when a program officer invites the Division of Grants and Agreements to come out to your institution to actually look at your, it could be your award or your proposal. It could be on the pre-side where we're determining, does this proposal really work the merit of what we're trying to get out of our overall scope of NSF. Also, it could be maybe in the middle of an award. We want to see, okay, you're in year 3 out of a 5-year award. We want to see how you're really doing. Another reason that we could see a site visit, it could be due to annual reports. We might see something in the annual report that might trigger, you know what, we might need to go out and visit this institution. But we'll go into that in a little later on in the presentation. The second one, the Division of Institutional Award and Support Contracted Desk Reviews. This is where NSF actually contracts out to a contractor. Usually it is a accounting firm that will basically ask an institution basically very specific questions about how they run their awards to a very specific degree. So we'll ask about ledgers and how do you process a payment that you receive from a vendor, all these very specific details. And if their desk review fares well, you might not see NSF physically because they have met the qualifications of that desk review. Now, sometimes we'll do what we call an advanced monitoring programmatic site visit, which is called a business assistance site visit. So basically what happens, we do 30 a year. And this year we're still going to actually meet that, even with this COVID-19 era that we're in. We're doing the rest of them virtually. So basically what happens, we take 5 days and we come out to your institution. In that 5 days, we actually we basically open up that proposal, that award that you have with NSF, and we see exactly how it works. We look at the total inner workings of the award. We look at your accounting system. How do you actually track your costs? We look at the policies and procedures that you have placed. I always tell grantees, for every dollar that you have on a budget, if we come out to visit you, we're going to look for policies and procedures to support the money that you have now been drawing from and using. So that's something that we do. It is not an audit. We are not auditors. I'm not an auditor. Cartia is not an auditor. This is a business assistance program. So what if we find something? That's what grantees always want to know. That's fine. It's an opportunity for us to help you before something goes wrong. So we'll offer you recommendations. I always tell grantees, it's better for you to see me than the Office of an Inspector General. Those are two different visits. So I would prefer you see me because I'm actually trying to help you in the sense of if there's something wrong, let me fix it. And if you don't know what the OIG is, it's the Office of Inspector General. They look at fraud, waste, and abuse. So those are like criminal activities. So I am doing all that I can to make sure you never have to deal with the OIG. Also, we do what we call Division of Financial Management Baseline Monitoring. And those basically where we just run tests. This is in a separate division of NSF, and basically they'll run like what we call transactional testing. And basically they'll look at how often you draw down. Are you reconciling your ledgers to make sure that if there was an error, are you going back and reconciling those things? And then finally, the OIG audit. Now, I always tell grantees, it is very wise for grantees to look at the OIG reports. The reports are free, they're available, but I tell grantees to look at the OIG audit report because it actually goes into detail. What happens when grantee institutions do something illegally? But it is a great source for any grantee to learn about what not to do. And the goal is for you to never be part of the OIG audit report. That is the goal. Do not get in the report. But it is a great tool for you, especially if you're new to NSF or even if you're new to federal awards. It is a great source for you to use. Next slide. So I'm not going to talk long because I know Ram and Julie are going to talk about annual reports. So I don't want to overstep my my bounds on this, but I will say this. If you look at this slide right here, it is a journey, okay? You do an annual report every year, okay? That last, say you have a 5-year report, that last annual report is your final report, okay? Now, the biggest thing that I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna let Rob and Julie really take the annual report into more detail. When you're dealing with a project outcome report, you are saying to the rest of the United States and the world that you are done with the grant. You have completed all the goals and objectives and you're done. And if you click that, if you say you're done, it's going to ask you, are you sure? Please be sure that you're done. Because once you click that button, you will be amazed how many times we get phone calls and emails and say, I submitted the annual report, but you know what? I'm not done with my project. And there are huge consequences of you clicking that, yes, I'm done. Because just because you click that button, that doesn't mean that NSF will automatically just reopen your award because you have said that you were done. Now we know we all make mistakes, but make sure you are very cautious. I don't care how many notifications you receive via email about your project or outcome report is due. If you're not done, do not submit the report. And that's all I'm going to say on that. And I'll leave the rest to Rob and Julie to continue on annual reports.
Thank you, Rashawn. Is that me? Better? Okay. Everybody hear me? Yes? Okay, good. Yeah, so the annual reports and the final reports are internal to NSF. That outcomes report is the one that is public. I'm looking at Rashawn for confirmation, yes. So we use those annual reports and final reports for sort of internal purposes, follow up and so forth. And now we're going to get into the details of those documents. Just a reminder here, these reports that are not submitted and approved on time will impact subsequent actions in NSF systems for all senior personnel on the grant. So just click one time, Kartia, just to reiterate, annual reports that are not submitted and approved on time will impact subsequent actions for all senior personnel in that grant and those other grants that may have overdue and not approved reports. And just for maximum effect, make sure that this sinks in, because a lot of people don't understand this issue. So if you are co-PI on an award, but you're also co-PI on another pending action in our systems, this will hold, if you have a report that's not approved, no other actions can happen until that's been approved. And so I see a question about, well, what if it's been submitted, but it's not approved? It has to be approved. So yeah, sometimes they're not approved by NSF program officers, but we work on that on our end, but you must get these in early, because if it's not approved, it's late. And so we recommend that as soon as you start getting those notices that it's due, start thinking about getting it in so that we have time to approve it before it's late. Anything else to add on that, Rashawn? I wanted to hit that hard because I know that's an issue that comes up repeatedly.
Thank you, Rob. We get a lot of phone calls from grantees to say, well, I submitted my report and I'm waiting on an increment and I don't know what's going on. And I always tell them, just because you submitted it doesn't mean that it's been approved. Also, if, like Rob said, if you wait to the last minute to submit your annual report, do not think that a program officer is going to stop everything they're doing to review your annual report, because you had 90 days to submit it. So there's really no excuse for you to expect basically everybody to just drop everything because you were basically waiting to the last minute to submit your annual report. So please do not procrastinate when it's dealing with annual reports. And also, like Rob said, that a co-PI on another award who hasn't turned in their annual report could mess up your funding. So you have to be aware of everyone that you're doing business with. That means the co-PIs who also have other federal awards, have other NSF awards. When you are looking at, we see it all the time. We're almost ready to review an award. I'm almost ready to click the button to give you this award. And guess what? I have an overdue report. I can't do anything. The system will not allow us in the Division of Grants and Agreements to issue an award if you have an overdue report. It's impossible. There's no go around.
Thank you. Okay, Kartia. Great. So we wanted to provide some tips for completing your annual and final reports. We've broken it down into the relevant subsections of these reports. And so a bit on accomplishments here. We have often returned annual reports because in this accomplishment section, we see reports that are not connecting the accomplishments back to the project goals and objectives from the proposal. Make it easy for the program officer. Take those goals and objectives that you said you were going to do in the proposal and report your progress on those goals and objectives. This is the work that was peer reviewed by folks in your field, was found to be worthy, and was as such funded. So we are looking for progress on those goals and objectives. We ask that you be consistent across years. At some point in there's a question about what are your plans for next year in accomplishing the goals and objectives. And so we will look at that section, and then we'll look at the following year's report, and we will see your progress on what you said you were going to do in the following year. So these are critically important issues to link across years. We look for this. We look for progress in 1 year in relation to what you said you were going to do in the prior year. So these are the prompts that are provided in the annual report format, and these help to guide us as we review these. Okay, next. So these individual annual reports are not meant to be cumulative. So we ask that you stick to the current reporting period. These tally in our systems. We can click and see what you did in year 1, and then we want to see progress on year 2, right? So we don't need the year 2 report to also cover year 1. We need year 2 to cover what you did in that year. Also, don't submit the same report twice. If we look in the system and we can see that it's basically the same content that you submitted the prior year, what you are telling the federal government is that essentially you just did all that work for free, essentially. So please report on what you've been working on, and don't submit the same report twice. Be thorough. We're looking for more than just a couple sentences. We want there to be meat here. You know, be thorough and thoughtful in how you're reporting on your project activities. If there are reports from your advisory board, or maybe you have an evaluator on your project, please include those. Or if maybe there's not room for attachments, maybe you've exceeded the limit on attachments, you can email that right to the program officer. But we like to see those. Oftentimes, those kinds of documents give really good insight to us as program officers about how things are going. And so if you say that your advisory board met back in the fall, but then you don't include any documentation from that meeting or any recommendations from that meeting, as a program officer, I'm going to return that annual report and I'm going to ask to see their feedback on how things are going. Okay, good. I'm going to turn things over to Julie and let her finish up this section. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Cartia, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, so products, papers, activities, curriculum, websites, apps, right? So what are the things that are being produced as a result of the work that you are doing, right? Now, in the old days, we used to actually have people send us the big curriculum boxes. We don't need you to do that. You might, though, for example, take photographs of things that you have produced if they are sort of physical things, and you just want to make sure that we're aware that, yes, your production is going forward, and you want to give us a sense of what that looks like, right? Obviously, because in the reporting system, there are limits to how many things you can attach. You might need to send something separately as an email, or you might want to think about how do you put together your attachments. You know, people can put together a PDF portfolio, for example, and upload that, and it might have multiple things. But we do want to get an understanding of what's being produced. I would say that we use these annual reports, one, to understand what's happening with your projects, but two, we also get questions from the NSF leadership, from Congress, about what's happening in particular things, who's done what, and this section becomes very important in our ability to go and inquiry the system. An additional caveat is you can identify, for example, that a manuscript is in process. I have seen projects that forget to go back and update the status of something that they have published, right? So it was being reviewed, then it was in process, and then it sort of stopped there. So we don't know, did it actually get published? So think about that and make sure that you look at that. Cartia, could you go to the next one? All right, participants in organizations. There's a section in the annual report that asks you, who are the people and the organizations who have worked on the project in the reporting period? Right, so it may be graduate students, it may be undergraduate students, it may be a community partner, it may be another organization, right? So you do need to identify those individuals, because again, that's another place where we're looking at effort and work. If your proposal said there were X number of people that were working on your project, and when we go look in your annual report, we don't see that, that's not very helpful, because it's not it's either not an accurate reflection of what's going on, or you forgot to have a conversation with your program officer that something changed and now you have less people working on your project. So that would be very, very important. And likewise, again, we do know that people leave a project. So the communication with your program officer is important. And I would say, if you aren't at least having one brief conversation with your program officer once a year, just as a check-in, that might be challenging for you, right? So it is a relationship. As Rashawn said earlier, part of their processes are to keep you from being in the OIG report. Well, I would say your program officer is another person who's trying to keep you honest and out of jail. We really don't want that to happen, because it doesn't look good for anybody. And then again, the reporting of time and effort should be consistent with what you have said in the original proposal, or what you have adjusted and communicated with your program officer. Next slide, please. So thinking about impacts. So there's a section at near the end of the proposal and end of the report that asks you about impacts in various categories: disciplinary impacts, impacts for professional development, impacts on the field. And the challenge here is that some of the language in the system says, please report on impacts you have had or intend to have. And that's an unfortunate wording, because actually we only want you to report on the impacts that you have had. We don't want you to copy and paste from the proposal. We intend to do this. We intend for no. Please only report on the things that actually have occurred. Therefore, in the first year of your award, typically your report, because there's a 90-day lead time, is a 9-month report, not a 12-month report. Depending on the nature of your work, it might be really hard pressed for you to say you have had a definitive impact or a definitive finding in that first 9 months. It's not totally without possibility, but it's less likely, right? So you would just put none, right? Don't overclaim. Again, this is an area where we go in and query the system to be able to respond to external questions about the impacts of our projects. And when we see language like, we will do this, we do send reports back saying, please remove those impacts that have not occurred. So this is really important. There's a note here also about reporting outcomes by item. So some projects are about developing measures or instruments. And perhaps there is something in the work that you've done where there's an item level statistic that that relates to the measures, right? And maybe you just want to say something about that one thing, but we wouldn't expect that you would be reporting for each item. So it's not really at the item level, it's at the measurement level. And so just to think about that.
Just one more comment on that,
Yes.
Julie. So, sometimes we'll see that you have a curriculum, but you're comparing it to like a counterfactual condition. Yes. And you will report item level differences between your treatment and your comparison condition. Well, when doing that kind of reporting, you're violating a whole host of assumptions around measurement theory and practice. And so we ask that you don't report outcomes or differences across groups by item. Individual items are extremely noisy. I don't need to get into all the details now, but these are not the kinds of details that we want to see in reports. Now, if you're developing a measure and you want to show us difficulty and discrimination and that sort of thing, item statistics in the development of said measure, that's different. But when you're reporting findings of your curriculum, we don't want outcomes by item. Thank you. Carry on.
Next slide, thanks. So I think it has been said a couple times already today, no project is a perfect project. Life happens after you hit that submit button and you send your proposal off. Goes through a review process that can take 6 to 8 months. Then you're finally awarded, right? That thing that you said you were going to do, the context in which you're doing the work suddenly changes. We expect that. I will tell you the thing that irks us more than anything else is when we know that there are issues and you are not reporting them. Because we have other ways of looking to see like what's happening, right? So it is fine to say, and hopefully you will have talked to your program officer at some point during the year. You're not going to stack them all up at the end and go, okay, here are all the things that happened across the year. But it is fine to report on, and we actually encourage you to do that. We can be thinking partners with you, right? So problems or delays, those things occur, right? We thought a vendor suddenly goes belly up and you had to delay because you have to find a new vendor, right? Or there's some structure or process within your organization that's suddenly different. So the people you were gonna hire, you couldn't hire them as quickly, so things get shifted, right? We understand that these things that can happen. We also understand that there are timing delays between principal investigators, they're reporting to their financial entities, and those individuals then reporting to NSF or doing a drawdown. So we understand that timing delays occur. All you have to do is put into the box that talks about, are there changes in the budget? Were there delays? Yes, right? This is a 9-month report, so we've only drawn down 3/4 of the budget, but we are fully intending to spend as budgeted, right? Or wow, we really got off track, and so we needed to really shift how we were reallocating out our budget. So again, these things are really important to communicate. Hopefully you're communicating closer to the time of the occurrence of the issue, and the annual report is a documentation of, yes, these things that occurred during this year, we did talk to our program officer, and we are noting here again that these occurred. Next slide. Again, continuing on with this notion of the expenditures, I would say also, again, this is a text-based system with the ability to upload things. You may be significantly off your spending plan that your program officer might ask you to give an updated spreadsheet showing what you haven't spent in this year and how that's going to get rolled in to what you plan to spend next year. And again, this might be a conversation that occurs as you are putting together your proposal, your annual report, and therefore you might upload a spreadsheet that has a clear, like, yes, this is a timing issue, but we're okay, or no, things really got out of whack. So again, it's really important. Remember that your budget is the numerical story that should match the narrative of your project story. The narrative of your annual report should match the numerical version of your annual report. Next slide. Human subjects. So often an award, if it's not exempt, if it's not exempt for the life of the award, it has gotten approval, and the approval is typically something that gets renewed annually, right? Help us help you, right? You all know that unless you have an active approved IRB, you shouldn't be doing data collection or anything. We need to have a copy of your updated IRB. You can upload that with your annual report. Sometimes your IRB timing is different than the annual report timing, so it's always a good idea when you get that amendment that you then forward it to your program officer saying, hey, here's my most recent updated document, right? We will ask for it at the time of reporting. And for me, at least, I will say that I want to have all pieces before a report can be approved, right? So if there are things that are missing, we have to send it back to you. That delays the time of the approval. This notion of I waited to the 88th day, you know, we manage multiple projects. So Rashawn is correct. We're not sitting there just waiting for yours. First in, first out, right? Another thing I will say, though, that we haven't touched on here, some of you have awards where you have subawards, and some of you chose to use the simultaneous submission option for a collaborative proposal. What this means is that everybody in that collaborative has to submit an annual report. The annual report is for a project, for the project as a whole. So if there are 3 collaborative partners, 2 of you submit your annual report and the third one doesn't, we're waiting on the third one because it's a project annual report. And the annual reports will get approved together. So if you chose that option, it is more things for you to think about and to coordinate when it comes to your annual and final reporting, right? So I just want to make sure that's clear because we hadn't called that out before. So next slide, Cartia. And I think this is both of us, right? So a communication, knowing the requirements, and then I'm going to turn it back to you, Cartia.
And I'm actually going to turn it over to Rashawn.
I knew that was coming. So like what Julie, Rob, Cartia, and I have been discussing through this entire presentation is this theme of effective communication. Your grant cannot be successful with a party of one. There are numerous people involved in the success of your grant. The Office of Sponsored Research, your program officers, the IRB. There are a lot of players to make your award successful. But you have to communicate. If you do not effectively communicate with the people that are trying to help you succeed, it will show. There will be ways that we will see something is wrong. The connection is off. If you're not communicating with your Office of Sponsored Research, we will know. If you're not communicating with your program officer, we will know. There are telltale signs without you ever sending us an email that we'll know that something's wrong. Also, when you're reading, look at your award notice. It's been, like Julie said, 6 to 8 months since you actually submitted this proposal. So once you get that award letter, take some time, read it. Read it with your Office of Sponsored Research office. Have a meeting. If there's anything in that award notice that you do not understand, for one, contact your Office of Sponsored Research so they can break it down to you. If that doesn't help, guess what? You can contact the Division of Grants and Agreements. Because the one thing I don't want anyone on this presentation or on this webinar is to draw down money without understanding what you have got yourself into. Read that solicitation over again. It's been a long time since proposal to award, okay? Make sure in that solicitation you're focusing on what you can do and what you cannot do budgetarily. It is huge because you don't want to be in violation of a solicitation. That is easy terms. If a program officer sees that you are violating a solicitation, that is rights to terminate an award. It's just that simple. So make sure you are aware of the solicitations, guidelines, rules, and regulations. Like I said earlier, take a moment. I've been on numerous site visits and I've noticed that grantees sometimes do not sit down with their Office of Sponsored Research to discuss the budget. Like Julie said, it's been a long time since that, from the proposal to the award. So the cost of the pieces of equipment have changed. Your consultant rates may have gone up. Your subaward costs have gone up. They could have gone down. There's so many changes that could have happened within that time frame. So make sure you sit down with your Office of Sponsored Research to discuss it. Also, document the conversations that you have with us, because at any given point, you may be audited. And if you're audited and you're saying, well, NSF said I could, the auditors are going to want to know, well, prove it. And the only way you can prove it is via email. So make sure you keep your official grant file as a way to track the history and the journey of your award. Always, this is the one thing I always stress. Please, 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 please keep good accounting records. You can have the greatest science in the world, but if your accounting is off, all that great science can go down the drain quickly. You'll be amazed how many awards that we have terminated because of something that had nothing to do with the science of the award. Remember, just because you have great scientific merit, you have all these broader impacts and get reviewed well and all these great reviews, but if you do not have your business in order, meaning the institution cannot manage this award and cannot be fiscally responsible, we can, and we have, and we will continue to shut down an award. And at that point, it's a sad event. And I don't take pride and I don't take solace and joy when I shut down an award, because I know that it's affecting a lot of people and mainly students. So it is imperative that you are aware that just all these pieces of the puzzle matter, and you have to be vigilant on every one.
Okay, so this is some contact information for our team in DGA, and you can feel free to ask us questions as early as often. But one thing I want to point out is if you send us an email, please include your award number. This is how we can be more efficient with responding to your inquiries. Please leave a voicemail, but in that voicemail, leave your award number. Many times we receive emails and voicemails and we have no way of looking up your institution. So help us help you, like Julie said. These are links that we have provided for some of the policy and procedures guide, the policy office newsletters that can be quite helpful, and a link to us in DGA. Feel free to bookmark these websites. I will say with the proposal and award policies and procedures guide, the PAPG, that it is a PDF form. So it's easily searchable by using the find feature, which is Control F. That's very, very useful tool for you.
And that's great. That PAPG expires in just a couple days. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, so
yes.
A new one will go into effect on June 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would,
20-1.
yeah, I would also just add, because I know sometimes the award documents go to the AOR and not necessarily directly to the PI, or depending on how the institution submits. Two additional things that people want to be aware of are your general grant conditions, which are spelled out in the award letter. That is another very helpful document about things you should do and monitor, as well as the prospective new awardee guide, right? And so between the PAPG and your grant conditions and the new awardee guide, there are multiple sources for you to get information about the managing of various parts of your project, both the programmatic parts and the fiscal parts.
And on top of that, prospective new awardee guide is a great tool for you to, if you're new to federal awards, but NSF is going to give you a walkthrough of what NSF is actually looking for to determine if you can actually manage an award. So what are some of those things? We'll look at your financial statements. We'll look at, say, these will be very accounting terms, so just bear with me. Your asset to debt ratio. We'll look at to see how were you incorporated. your tax code. I mean, there's all these little things that we look at. We look at your policies and procedures. Do you have policy procedures on the money that you have requested in these line items in your proposal? And also, if it's, say, under 500,000, the Division of Grants and Agreements will review that prospective new awardee guide. If it's above that amount, it will go to our sister organization within NSF, which is our Cost Analysis and Audit Resolution branch. And basically, they'll do even more digging, and they'll do a financial review. And in that review, they're going to look at 2 criteria. Are you financially viable? So are you solvent? Do you have enough money without NSF funding to manage your own business? 1. Number 2, we'll look and see, do you have a proper accounting system in place? So what does that mean? Do you have something outside of an Excel spreadsheet to track your cost? So is there a PeopleSoft? What are you using to track all of these costs? And are they being segregated? And if anybody asks for you to pull a report on all the participant support that you have on this award, can you do it? And sometimes I've been out on many site visits, they can't because they don't have a proper accounting system. Now that's probably after the fact, as I already awarded, and then I realized you switch systems and now I have to come and find something new. But that's what the whole prospective new awardee got. Another thing, and we didn't touch on this, but this is very important. When you are getting an award from NSF, it is a great thing. It's a huge accomplishment, and we want to support you and congratulate you on that huge accomplishment. However, you should never, keyword, never wait until the award is about to end to seek new opportunities. When you do that, from a financial standpoint, if you haven't received an award in another 5 years, we're going to do another review. And just because you got this first award 5 years ago doesn't mean you're going to get the new award 5 years later. So what am I trying to say? Constantly look for opportunities for you to look for new proposals, new solicitations. I always tell grantees, we have many directorates. Sometimes we get stuck in our own comfort zones, but look for new opportunities within NSF. Apply, collaborate with other institutions. There's a lot of opportunities here, and you'll be amazed how often I have to beg people to apply for opportunities. Begging people so I can give them money. I know that sounds really strange, but I do it all the time. And I don't know why, but I do. So just make sure that you're constantly seeking new funding opportunities. Now, that I'll stop.
Thank you, Rashawn. This is great. We had intended to do this at the DRK12 PI meeting, which of course did not happen. And so this Zoom webinar allowed us to open it up to a broader audience, which is great. And so I want to especially thank Rashawn and Kartia for joining us and setting aside time to go over some of these issues. I think now back to Cadre for questions. Is that right? You all been moderating the questions?
We have, and we've had a number come in during the presentation. So I'll just start going through those. We have a quick clarification question around indirect costs. Are rate agreements determined by the institution or federally?
It is the agreement between both.
Both.
So it's the agreement between the institution. They submit the indirect cost proposal to the federal government. Federal government, whoever their cognizant agency is, it could be NSF, it could be Department of Health and Human Services, it could be the Office of Naval Research, it could be Department of Education. Whomever it is, whatever that rate agreement is, that's what all federal agencies will honor.
It tends to be HHS.
Yeah, it tends to be HHS. Yeah.
But, but I'm speaking for academic types of
yeah, but you in those rate agreements are what we go by. So we don't override it. Whatever that rate is, that's what we're going to stick with. You can't create a new rate because it's not advantageous to your proposal.
Okay. We have a couple of questions related to PI transfer. One is, can the PI who's moving to a new institution ask one of the co-PIs who may have a subaward to take lead and become PI?
Okay, hypothetically, they can ask, but in that same breath, the award is with the institution. So if the institution agrees with this new setup and they're willing to relinquish it to the co-PI, it could happen. But it's all dependent on if the institution will relinquish the rights of and privileges of the award.
So in a scenario where the institution does relinquish the rights, the PI moves, and the IRB is at her previous institution, do they need to start a new IRB protocol?
Typically, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I just did one of these, and yeah, the receiving institution has to have, yes, some documentation of IRB. Yes.
Okay. We have a few questions related to COVID, and I'll preface these by saying we did a webinar last week with a great panel, and one of our team will put a link to the recording and slides in the chat. But one question is whether NSF is adjusting expectations and regulations of awards and projects due to the pandemic in any way.
Yeah, this was covered in quite a bit of detail. I'll let Julie weigh in, but yes, I mean, we're trying to be as flexible as possible, and one of the easiest ways is with changes of dates of projects and grantee approved no cost extensions, NSF approved no cost extensions, pushing out end dates of projects to allow for flexibility to complete the work, and that's the easiest thing that we can do. Julie.
I was just going to say NSF has an entire site devoted to it, with FAQs for grantees, for AORs, etc. So if you have not gone to the NSF site and gone to the COVID resources, you definitely want to check that out, because probably many of your questions will be answered there.
Okay, and some of these may be answered in the FAQs, but another COVID-related question was whether projects would be penalized if they don't meet the goals, outcomes, or objectives due to the pandemic.
So again, this is a conversation with your program officer. A delay of a project because of COVID is one thing. If you are going to materially change the scope of your project, you need to have a conversation with your program officer, because you will need to actually submit a request for change of scope.
Okay. Question related to no cost extensions. Is there a range of budget amount or percentage that can be carried over to a no cost extension year? For example, if there's too much money left over, is that a bad sign?
I'm not laughing at the question. It could be a bad sign. Because okay, so let me take the first part of the question. Yes, you can do a no cost extension with money remaining, saying from year 1 to year 5 into your no cost extension, right? The issue becomes when there's a large amount of money that hasn't been spent on a project. And I'll say this in the context that it probably really wouldn't happen, because the program officer would already be aware of any large unobligated balance, especially if it was a continuing grant, because they will look to see exactly how much you've been drawing down. And if you haven't been drawing down a lot of funds, 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't give you the next increment. So as far as no cost extensions, there's not an amount or a set amount that triggers program or anyone in DGA to question, say, a no cost extension request. What would be what if you had a large unobligated balance? So that would be the really big thing that would call into question, well, is something going wrong? That doesn't mean that the no cost extension wouldn't be honored, but it might take some conversations with program officers and your Office of Sponsor Research and Division of Grants and Agreement, just so we can help you more than anything else.
Okay. We have a question to subawards. can an awardee shift more work and funding to a subawardee without requesting prior approval from NSF?
They can, and if, keyword if, the amount of effort that you're now transferring doesn't appear that it's now a change in scope. So if you're saying you were only going to do, say, one goal of the award, now you're doing 4. Okay, well, what happened? Or you're transferring, say, you only had 20% of the award effort to the subaward, now you're transferring, say, 80. Okay, that's a huge difference. So if it appears that it's a change, it could be a change of scope, just contact your program officer before you submit or move that money, but it is allowable.
Okay. Then we have a number of questions related to reporting requirements. The first is there a way for a PI to find out if their co-PIs have delinquent reports before they submit a proposal?
Is there a way to check? Is there a way to check the co-PIs? Okay, so the best way I can tell you to do that would be prior to you submitting your annual report, have a discussion with your Office of Sponsored Research office. And that way you can then talk to the Office of Sponsored Programs and say, hey, I have these individuals on my annual report. Can you see if they have any overdue reports? They can easily check that for you. And that way it would actually be beneficial to you before you actually submit that annual report.
Okay. We also have a question about the kinds of documentation NSF is looking for from advisory boards. For example, do you have to have a report from advisory board members? Would there be one report from each member? Or what kinds of documentation do you typically look for?
So I'll take a first pass at this one. In part, it's goes back to what the role of your advisory group is. So in our reference in the annual report, this is about those advisory boards that are serving as your external oversight of a project, or perhaps they are the ones responsible for the evaluation, in which case, just like an evaluator, they would be submitting a report to you about their oversight during that year. So it would be that kind of report that you would want to, information you would report out on or upload. It's not about each individual advisor writing a report about what they did. This is mostly in the cases of where people have identified their advisory boards having a particular function of oversight, where they've said, our board is going to make sure we do X, Y, and Z. That means the board is doing it, not the PI is doing it, and the board's stamping its approval. So I hope that clears that up.
Okay, we have a question about who gets reported as partners in the participants and organizations section of the report, and whether IRB regulations preclude awardees from naming teachers and district partners.
So the people that get reported are the people that are working on the project. So if you have identified teachers, for example, a core group of teachers who are part of the core project team, then they would be reported. If you're saying teachers who are participating in workshops, they're not part of your core project team, they are an audience that you would report out on. And I would say the same thing would go with entities with whom you've named in the proposal as material partners doing work. They would get listed. Rob, what else would you say about that? You're mute, Rob. You're muted. You're still muted. Can somebody unmute Rob, please?
I'm trying.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Hey,
there you
there
go.
we go. I just got dropped and got back on, so I missed the beginning part of the question. But
So the question was about who should be there was a 2 or 3 part question. Who should be reported under organizations and partners in the annual report? And is there anything in an IRB that would preclude you from listing teachers? And so my response was, you're listing the people who are materially part of conducting the project. Therefore, if teachers were part of a core group of individuals working at the project implementation level, you would have identified them in your proposal, and they would be listed as people doing work, which is different than teachers who are participants in workshops, trainings, etc.
Okay. Is it better to submit your final report early in the due period or wait longer so that there's more information about the study's papers, et cetera, that might be included in the review?
So final reports have the opposite 120-day period, which is after the end of the award date, which is different than the annual report, which is 90 days prior to the end of a project year. And it's done that way so you would have time to make sure that that you had finished out your analysis, etc. So if it's your final report, it's due 120 days. You have 120 days from the end of the final grant year.
Okay. When should someone contact a grant officer versus their program officer?
So if it is a budgetary question or you are questioning, is this an allowable cost? Contact the Division of Grants and Agreements. You'll contact CARTI, you contact myself. If it's a question about a scientific issue, something related to the science of your project, you will contact your program officer. So the Division of Grants and Agreements deals with the money. The program officers deal with the actual science.
Okay. We have a question about a scenario in which an institutional dean has changed an awardee's teaching load, increasing it for the 2020 to 2021 academic year. Is this something to communicate with their PO via email to describe in the annual report, or is it outside the scope of what NSF cares about?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I'm assuming your FTE on the grant is remaining the same. That's going to be our primary point of interest. So if you're budgeted at 15% for the grant, then that's what you told us in the proposal that it would take to do the work. And so we believed you, and so we funded you at that level. Now, if then your teaching load is starting to reduce your work on the grant, then yeah, that's I think when you'd want to reach out to the program officer. You told us that it would require X% of your time to do this work, and so we supported you at that level, and so that's sort of the understanding that's in place. Now, if that needs to be changed and you want to explain to us that you could still conceivably do the work at 10% time or something like that, then that's different, but you do need approval to reduce your FTE. Or perhaps even increase your FTE on the grant. I think these things require NSF approval.
Okay. What's the easiest way to add a co-PI to a project?
So the easiest way will go into research.gov and add, I think it's called addition of co-PI. And that request is done. It's basically channeled once you submit it. It's channeled to the program officer. The program officer reviews it, reviews the vita that is attached, and make sure that they're qualified to actually be a co-PI. Then they then forward it to our office in Division of Grants and Agreements. We then review it and make sure everything's okay, and then we issue an amendment acknowledging, approving the addition of the new co-PI.
I would add that it's always a good idea to talk with your
Oh,
program officer if you're going
mhm,
to add or remove,
mhm,
because as Rashawn said, we will look at stuff and approve. So we actually do get to say, this person doesn't have the same expertise or qualifications as you identified was necessary for the conduct of your project, right? So you should have that conversation, and then officially you will submit it through research.gov.
Okay. We had someone wondering if you could say a little bit more about what constitutes supplemental funding and under what circumstances these funds can be requested.
The PAPG covers supplemental funding requests in quite a bit of detail, but basically these are unanticipated events that couldn't have been foreseen at the start of the project, for which you need supplemental funding to complete the original scope of work. If you're proposing something that's outside the original scope to do with supplemental funds, that's different. That's a new proposal, a new question, a new set of goals that typically would need to come in for review in our standard process. But the PAPG covers supplemental funding requests in quite some detail. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
you nailed that.
Okay.
And if in doubt, talk to your program officer. There are some programs that may not actually do supplemental funding because of a particular budget cap they have, right? So all of the stuff that we fund comes out of our budget, which means if we're funding supplements, we can't fund new awards or vice versa. So the line of something has happened such that you cannot complete the original scope of work.
Mhm.
Not that it's, oh, this is really cool and we also want to do this. We think that's great, but that's not the reason for a supplement.
We have a question related to a specific example of that. Is NSF considering COVID-19 supplements for graduate students who may have their graduation delayed due to closures or disruptions?
You'd have to look at the FAQs to see. So everything we know is what is on the NSF site.
I mean, the nature of the question is, it's a little confusing because supplements aren't issued to individuals. They're made to institutions. So there wouldn't necessarily be a case where a supplement would go to a grad student in the way that you asked the question. So, I mean, we are trying to be as flexible as possible. We recognize that graduate student populations are vulnerable in these times. And so we're encouraging PIs to do all they can to support your graduate students, keep them working, writing, analyzing data, that sort of thing. I had a call with a couple PIs last week who, as faculty, they had agreed to sort of delay the project a bit for a year, essentially. And as part of that, they were reducing their own FTE on the project as a way to sort of save some costs a little bit so that they could support grad students and maybe continue the work, say the following summer. And so that was, it's not something we're asking PIs to do, but the fact that they were doing this, I thought was a reasonable approach at trying to extend the work of the grant and support grad students who are working on the project.
Okay. Could you say a little bit more about what's meant by accumulation and segregation of costs? And I think this was in the Pathways to Success slide earlier in the presentation.
So the segregation of costs or the accumulation of costs. So in any award, you're always going to have an accumulation of costs. The biggest thing about that is, how do you segregate those costs? Do you have separate account codes? Do you have separate sub-cost ledgers to break down how you can extrapolate those costs from, let's just take, for instance, if you have participant support. Do you have a separate account code for participant support, which is one, but then do you have sub-cost ledgers? So there's one for stipends, there's another one for subsistence, there's another one for travel, there's another one for that F4 other. So that way that you can truly segregate those costs out. And I always tell this as an example. if you had all your costs accumulated, right, in travel, but we know on the budget you have participant support travel and you have regular travel. How are you going to extrapolate those travel costs from your participants from your PI's traveling? So you must have separate account codes and cost ledgers that you can extrapolate those costs out.
Okay. We have a question about where awardees should submit updated IRB documentation within the report.
You can, if depending on the nature and structure of your report and your attachments, there are a couple places in the reporting portal where it says you can upload documents. I think you're limited to 3 though, so usually it's easiest if you just email the IRB to your program officer. However, you can upload it in the report if you wish.
Okay, we have a follow-up question to the earlier answer around the participants and organizations section. This participant is wondering, what about teachers in schools who are field testing curriculum materials and providing feedback on them? Should they be reported as partners?
We see this handled in different ways. I think probably not students, but definitely not students. But yeah, sometimes you will see teachers reported out in an annual report, but sometimes that's not feasible just given the size of some of these projects working with dozens of teachers. But if you're working closely with a handful of teachers to develop something and do some trials, that's fine. But I think within reason, we like to see some of that stuff included in the reports.
Okay, can you say a little bit more about the project outcome report and what that looks like?
Sure. I don't know, do I have I saw that question earlier, so I went to research.gov to the research spending and results to try to pull up one. So I don't know if I can share my screen, but if Cartia, I guess, stops sharing her screen, I could. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so hopefully you will see this. We're on research.gov. This is the spending and results, and I've already put in a prior expired award. You can actually go do this yourself to your current award. And what you will see is the information, and the public can do this as well. So they can go to nsf.gov and search the awards database and get the abstract of your award, or they can come to this research and spending results because it's government funding, therefore it is public, and they can put in your award number, you can put in your award number, and you will get some basic details about the awardee, the PI, co-PI, the funds that have been obligated. So this is standard stuff that would be available right now on any award. Who the program officer is, where the awardee is, where the place of performance. So if you remember in filling out your cover sheet, it's pulling things from the cover sheet. The abstract at the time of the award. So your active awards will have, up to this point, will have this information. When you put in things in your annual report about publications, they will show up here. And then at the end of your grant, this is what Rashawn was talking about, when that final piece comes, you write an end of project public facing report. And this is the part, this is what constitutes the project outcomes report. It is put at the end, after the abstract, after any publications that you've listed. And it says this is for the general public, and it's what you are telling the world about your project. Okay. And that has to be submitted when you are submitting your final report and you are saying, yes, we are done. So I hope that
was really good.
Okay.
That's great. And remember, that's for public consumption. So try to use plain language. Try to frame the findings of your report in a way that would be understandable, impactful, understood by the general public. So you're writing for a slightly different audience than you would be maybe for a journal article or something like that. So perhaps a really good writing task.
Yeah.
Spend some time on that.
Or engage the PR people at your organization, probably people
Yes.
you've never talked to before. You're like, oh, could you help me write something that's public facing?
Yeah.
Okay, we just got one more question. You mentioned setting up an annual meeting with our program officer. In previous years, we've sought to do this at the PI meeting. During COVID, how would program officers like for awardees to arrange meetings with them? Just simply by email? And what are some of the outcomes the POs would like to hear about in such a meeting?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to vary from project to project. Yeah, I would reach out to your program officer. These are, how shall I say, really busy times, right? Particularly right now when both, say, DRK-12 and ASIL are in the midst of making awards for the next, say, 6 weeks. Is really quite busy. Things may slow down a little in the summer, but it's just a really challenging time. So, please just understand that, we're all doing the best we can, and also many of us trying to homeschool and look after little ones. And so these are difficult times. Sometimes an email with updates to your program officer can be quite helpful, because I value that. I can add that to the jacket. So your sort of official file here, I can add that correspondence and capture your feedback, or your sort of summary of progress in that way, or issues that you're having. Those are quite helpful as well. And sometimes, I can address an issue quickly over email and answer questions or concerns that have come in that way. Julie?
Yeah, I would say the same. So reach out. And then, you and your program officer can figure out what timing might be available. I can tell you now, somebody asked me for one last week, and I said, yeah, July. Here are a couple dates in July that I'll be ready to have, a half an hour conversation to check in. So now, if you emailed me and said that, and then later said, oh, well, actually, I have this big problem going on. Okay, that's different. Be clear about what the kind of contact is and what you need. So if it's just a check-in, obviously that can wait a bit. If there is an urgent issue, please reach out to your program officer with an email, because again, we could handle certain things via email, but be clear in your communication with us.
Okay, we have one last question / opportunity for the panel. There's a lot of information in the NSF FAQs on COVID, and there was the webinar where we discussed it at length last week. But do you have any other guidance today that you'd like to share around either reporting issues related to COVID or looking ahead to the fall with some uncertainty?
Yeah, this was covered in quite some detail on the previous webinar. I mean, you were funded to do what you were funded to do in your proposal. COVID has presented all sorts of challenges, but also maybe some opportunities, right, that you may be intrigued by or interested in. Well, some of those might be changes to your original scope, okay? And that's not what you were funded to do necessarily. So, I think my advice on the previous webinar, was to maybe focus on some other kinds of activities that maybe don't, if your project deals with a lot of data collection in schools, maybe you put that on hold, and maybe you think about iterating some of the development work that you were doing, one more time, or analyzing data, or doing some more dissemination, some writing, kinds of things that don't involve working in schools, but could still advance the goals of the project. So anything that would sort of change the scope or change the nature of what you're doing, I think you'd have to reach out and talk to the program officer about that. In fact, yes, you would, because you were funded to do a given thing, which you said you would do in your proposal, and changes to that what amounts to a change of scope. And so that's just my caution on that issue. Julie?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Rashawn, Cartia, I don't know what you guys have been hearing from the field, but.
Other than like what we've been awarding, which have been the Eagers and the Rapids, that's what's been, been going out, but we haven't heard anything as far as additional outside of those funding mechanisms. That's all that we have thus far.
Yeah.
All right, unfortunately we are out of time, but thank you so much to NSF and to our panelists for sharing this information. And thank you everyone for joining us in what we hope was a helpful session. Just a reminder that we'll email the slides and a recording to registered participants. And finally, congratulations to those of you with new awards, and good luck to all of you in your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Thank you.